off to an interesting start, I suppose, in terms of the events in our state. One of the first things that happened was we were threatened by a storm. We're so blessed that it didn't hit us, because had it veered just 40 miles to the west, this meeting would probably not be taking place today, as we would be recovering from a pretty monumental storm. So we're reminded that we had nothing to do with it, other than the petitions to our Creator to spare us its brunt, and He did, and we're grateful. I come to you at a critical moment on an issue you care about, both for our country and the world, and that's on the future of the state of Israel and America's relationship. And by the way, I'm not just going to limit our comments to that. I want to talk about the state of affairs in our nation as well. But I think it's related to the state of affairs in our relationship with Israel in many ways. Let me begin by saying that my affinity to the issue of Israel's security and its right to exist as a Jewish state is not just long-standing, but has deep roots. That really begins by just growing up in this community in South Florida. And what I mean by that is, and some people aren't fully aware of this, but on many instances, obviously growing up, one of the biggest issues before the community that I'm a member of, the Cuban American community, is the future of Cuba and our desire for Cuba to have a free and democratic process for its people. And consistently throughout that period of time, we found alliance with the Jewish American community, which in South Florida, by the way, has a substantial number of Cubans who are also Jewish, who also suffered from the loss of their homeland, and many of whom had to move for the third time in a generation, many of whom had already immigrated from different parts of Europe, fleeing the Holocaust and then having to leave Cuba as well. Part of it, quite frankly, was because Fidel Castro and his government was and remains an ally of the most treacherous people on the planet. They were close allies of Yasser Arafat. They are constantly coddling with the Iranians, Bashar al-Assad and the like, and his father before him. If there's a bad person on earth, a bad dictator, the Cuban government is alongside them and supporting them. So that really, that relationship has been long-standing and important. But my service in this context continued during my time in the state legislature. Carlos was there when I was the Speaker of the Florida House, and we were one of the first states in the country to divest our pension plan from any investment in Iran. And we did that because Iran is the world's leading sponsor of terror. Because virtually every resource they get their hands on, they use to punish anti-Semitic, anti-American terrorism anywhere and everywhere in the world that they can get away with. Whether it's bombings in Argentina or IEDs that killed Americans in Iraq. Iran is behind virtually every major terror attack in the last 20 years. And every penny they get is money available to them to sponsor that sort of terrorism. But when I have to explain to people, well, why should we care? Because there are a lot of people, and let me be frank with you, there are a lot of Jewish Americans who sometimes aren't as committed to the cause of Israel as some. Because the question is, why is it that we should care about Israel? Why should we have this alliance and take sides? And my answer is threefold. The first is it's in the national security interest of the United States. Israel happens to be the only pro-American free enterprise democracy in the entire Middle East. The only one. The only pro-American free enterprise democracy. Imagine if there were 5 or 8 free enterprise pro-American democracies in the Middle East. Well, I think that our conversation about the Middle East would be much shorter and simpler. But there's only one. There's only one. That alone is reason to stand with Israel. The second is that Israel is one of the few nations, if not the only on earth, created for a very unique and special purpose. And that is to serve as a homeland for a people that have faced persecution and oppression for only about 5,777 years. And it was created in the aftermath of the Holocaust in particular, where the Jewish people had nowhere to go, where they were actually denied entry into the United States, and Cuba, for that matter, on the St. Louis. And many lost their lives, over 6 million in that horrible, horrible period of time for humanity. And there was nowhere in the world to go. And if you look at how the Israeli Defense Forces train, every single member of the Israeli Defense Force is required to spend a day at Yad Vashem, so they understand that at the end of the day, their purpose is to ensure that that never happens again. And unfortunately, we'll talk about that in a moment. It's in the context of a moment in time when anti-Semitism has taken on a new, dangerous face. The third reason is because if you look at what Israel's asked of America in its defense, it's much different from what the rest of the world has asked for. Here's what Israel's never asked for. It's never asked for America to station troops. It's never asked us to start a war with anyone. All it has asked is, if we are attacked in international forums, defend us. And If we are attacked and we have to fight back, and we run out of weapons or missiles or ammunition, resupply us, we'll pay for it. That's it. Stand with us in international forums and resupply us if we come under attack. We'll pay for it. And for the first time in the modern history of this country, under this presidency, both of those assurances are in question. There have been overt and threats made to the Israeli government that we may not use the veto power at the UN the next time the issue of Palestinian statehood comes up. And I can tell you they raked them over the coals on the issue of what to do when the latest Intifada-type uprising occurred and Israel had to strike back at some of these terrorist elements. The U.S. delayed supplies, and to this day have forced Israel into a memorandum of understanding that is woefully low in the context of the threats that Israel is surrounded by, and that forces the Israeli government to commit that for 10 years they will not lobby the Congress of the United States for additional money. Here's the good news: they don't have to lobby me, because I'm in favor of increasing it, because our aid should be commensurate to the threat. I mentioned anti-Semitism for a moment. It is re-emerging, but it's re-emerging dressed up in something that people might think is socially acceptable. Here's how it's